The rain is particularly heavy tonight. I can hear it drumming against the roof of my cabin, a sound that most find soothing. Do you find it soothing? I used to, before that night at Ravens Peak. I found many things comforting that now only fill me with dread. I've been a forest ranger at Northwood National Park for just over a decade now. It's remote country, ancient forests, mist-shrouded mountains, valleys so deep they rarely see direct sunlight. During tourist season, we guide visitors through the safer sections, warn them away from the more treacherous areas. But come autumn, when the rains begin and the mists roll in, the tourists dwindle to just a handful of dedicated hikers and photographers drawn by the ethereal quality of the park in its most atmospheric season. It was one such photographer who changed everything for me. His name was Daniel Morris, award-winning nature photographer, renowned for capturing images of remote, rarely seen landscapes. The kind of photographer who would trek for days into wilderness to get the perfect shot at precisely the right moment. I'd actually seen his work before he ever set foot in Northwood. Haunting images of ancient forests wrapped in fog, mountain peaks emerging from clouds like islands in a spectral sea. He arrived at the main ranger station on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, just as I was finishing my shift. The rain, which had been falling steadily for days, had briefly subsided to a fine mist that hung among the trees like gossamer. "I'm looking for the trail to Ravens Peak," he said, setting down a backpack that seemed to consist mostly of camera equipment. "I understand the view from the northern ridge is quite remarkable." Something about his manner struck me immediately, an intensity, a focus that seemed almost feverish. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, as if already framing shots, capturing images. "Ravens Peak is closed this time of year," I told him. "The trail becomes treacherous in wet conditions, and the forecast is calling for heavy rain tonight." His expression didn't change, but his eyes fixed on me with newfound attention. "I'm well aware of the risks, Ranger Evans," he said, reading my name badge. "I've hiked in far worse conditions. My permit application was approved last month." This surprised me. Ravens Peak Trail was indeed usually closed from October through April. I checked our records and found he was right. His application had been approved, with a notation that he was an experienced outdoorsman documenting the park for a major nature publication. "I see," I said, still hesitant. "But given the current conditions in tonight's forecast, I'd strongly advise postponing your hike. The peak will still be there next week when conditions are safer." Morris smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The light won't be." There's a particular quality to the light after 3 consecutive days of rain, when the mist rises from a valley at sunset. That's what I'm here to capture. That's what I need. The word need hung in the air between us, weighted with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "At least take a radio," I suggested, seeing he was determined. "Self-service is non-existent up there." He accepted the radio with that same empty smile. "I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. If I'm delayed, I'll radio in." I watched him leave with a sense of unease I couldn't quite place. Just another stubborn photographer. I told myself we dealt with their type regularly. The rain returned that evening, heavier than before. I thought about Morris on the trail to Ravens Peak, and hoped he'd had the sense to make camp early rather than trying to reach the summit in such conditions. The following afternoon, as my shift was ending, I noticed Morris hadn't returned or called in. Not entirely surprising. Hikers often underestimated trail times or decided to stay longer than planned if they found good shooting conditions. Still, with the rain continuing unabated, I decided to try the radio. "Ranger Station to Daniel Morris." "Come in, Morris." Nothing but static. I tried again hourly until the end of my shift. No response. I noted in the log for the night, "Ranger, to continue attempts at contact." By the following morning, with still no word from Morris, we initiated standard search protocols. I volunteered to join the team heading up Raven's Peak Trail, feeling somewhat responsible since I've been the last to speak with him. The rain had transformed the trail into a treacherous ribbon of mud, slick and unstable. In places, small landslides had carried away portions of the path entirely, forcing us to pick our way carefully around exposed roots and rocks. The forest pressed close on either side, ancient pines dripping with moisture, their trunks black with rain, their canopies creating a darkness that seemed impenetrable even at midday. We found Morris's first campsite, about 3 miles up the trail. The tent was still there, properly secured against the weather, with some basic supplies inside, but no Morris, and notably, none of his camera equipment. He had clearly moved on, continuing toward the peak despite the deteriorating conditions. He must have been in a hurry to catch that light he mentioned. My colleague, Ranger Chun, observed as we carefully documented the scene. We radioed our findings to base and continued upward. The trail grew steeper, more challenging. In places, we had to use ropes to navigate particularly unstable sections. All the while, the rain continued. Not the violent downpour of the previous night, but steady, persistent drumming that soaked through even the best waterproof gear. About a mile from the peak, Chin spotted something off-trail, a flash of bright color against the muted greens and browns of the forest floor. We carefully made our way toward it. It was a high-end camera, half buried in mud, the strap tangled around the exposed roots of a massive pine, the kind of equipment that costs more than most people earn in a month. Why would he abandon this? Chin wondered aloud, carefully extracting it from mud. The camera was damaged beyond repair, its lens cracked, its body dented as if it had been dropped or thrown with considerable force. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. No photographer Morris's caliber would willingly part with such equipment, especially not in the middle of a shoot he'd been so determined to complete. We documented the location and continued our search with renewed urgency. The trail switched back severely as it approached the peak, cutting across steep slopes that in better conditions would have offered spectacular views of the valley below. Today, there was only mist and rain, the world beyond the trail edge fading into gray nothingness. We reached the summit just as dusk was beginning to gather. Raven's Peak isn't particularly high as mountains go, but its isolated position offers unobstructed views in all directions. Or would have on a clear day. That evening, standing at the summit cairn, we could see nothing but swirling mist occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. No sign of him, Chin said, his voice nearly lost in the sound of rain and wind. And he wouldn't be shooting in these conditions anyway. No light. I nodded, playing my torch beam across the small clearing that formed the summit area. The ground was rocky here, showing no obvious footprints. A small, 3-sided shelter stood at one edge of the clearing, a basic structure meant to provide temporary refuge from sudden weather changes. Let's check the shelter, I suggested. Then we should start back while we still have some light. We can resume the search tomorrow if needed. Chin nodded, clearly relieved at the prospect of returning to lower elevations. The shelter was empty, but showed signs of recent use. A partially burned candle, some energy bar wrappers. Morris had been here, perhaps waiting out the worst of the previous night's storm. I was about to turn away when my torch beam caught something tucked into a small gap between the shelter's wooden planks, a memory card, the kind used in professional cameras. Look at this, I said, carefully extracting it. He must have been here, taking photos. In this weather? Chun looked skeptical. What could he possibly shoot in this suit? I pocketed the memory card, intending to check it once we returned to the station. Let's make one more sweep of the area before we head back. We separated to cover more ground, staying within voice range as we circled the summit clearing. The rain seemed to intensify as darkness gathered, reducing visibility to just a few meters. My torch beam cut weakly through the gloom, catching raindrops in its light, making them look almost solid, like a curtain of glass beads. "Evans!" Chen's voice came suddenly, a note of alarm clear even through the rain. "Over here." I made my way toward his voice, skirting the edge of the clearing. Chen stood near the northern edge of the summit. His torch pointed down the steep slope that dropped away toward the valley. "Look," he said as I reached him, directing his beam. About 20 feet down the slope was a tripod, its legs embedded firmly in the muddy ground. It was positioned right at the edge of a sheer drop, a small cliff that fell away into mist-shrouded nothingness. "That's a professional setup," I said, recognizing the heavy-duty carbon fiber construction. "Must be Morris's. But where's the camera?" Chen asked, "and more importantly, where's Morris?" We carefully made our way down to the tripod. The slope was treacherous, the ground sodden and unstable under our boots. One misstep would send us sliding down toward that cliff edge. The tripod stood empty, its mounting plate bare, facing out toward what would have been, in better conditions, a spectacular view of the valley and the distant mountains beyond. Now it faced only swirling gray mist occasionally lit from within by silent lightning. "This makes no sense," Chen said, examining the area around the tripod. "Why set up here in these conditions? There's nothing to photograph." I was about to agree when my torch beam caught something else. A small, metallic object half buried in mud about 2 meters beyond the tripod, perilously close to the cliff edge. I approached carefully, the ground becoming increasingly unstable underfoot. It was another camera, smaller than the one we'd found earlier, likely a secondary body that professionals often carry. Like the first, it was damaged, its casing dented, its lens missing entirely. But unlike the first camera, this one's memory card slot was open and empty. "The car we found in the shelter," I said slowly. "It must have come from this camera." Chen looked from the camera to the cliff edge just beyond it. "You think he fell?" I played my torch beam over the edge, but the light was swallowed by mist after just a few meters. If Morris had fallen, his body could be hundreds of feet below, hidden by darkness and fog. "We need to get back to the station," I said. "Report this and organize a proper cliff rescue team for first light." Chen nodded, clearly relieved at the prospect of leaving the exposed summit. We carefully documented the scene, secured the damaged camera in an evidence bag, and began our descent as true darkness closed in around us. The journey down was even more treacherous than the climb up. The rain had intensified again, turning the trail into a muddy stream in places. Our torch beam seemed to grow weaker with each passing hour, as if the darkness had weight, substance, a presence that pushed back against our light. We were about halfway down when Chun, who was leading, suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the rain. I listened. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just a steady drumming of rain on leaves, the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Then, faintly, something else, a clicking sound, rhythmic, mechanical, like a camera shutter. "It's coming from over there," Chen said, pointing his torch off-trail into the dense forest to our right. The beam caught nothing but rain and trees. "It's just the wind in the branches," I said, though I didn't entirely believe it. The sound was too regular, too precise. "I'm going to check," Chen said, already moving toward the sound. I wanted to stop him, to insist we stay on the trail, but part of me needed to know what was making that sound as well. I followed, playing my torch ahead of us as we pushed through wet undergrowth. The clicking grew louder as we approached, more distinct, definitely mechanical, definitely a camera shutter, capturing image after image in rapid succession. The beam of my torch suddenly caught something pale among the dark trunks. A figure, standing with its back to us about 30 meters away. "Morris?" I called, relief flooding through me. "Daniel Morris?" The figure didn't turn, didn't respond. Just continued to stand motionless in the rain, while that mechanical clicking continued unabated. We moved closer, pushing through branches heavy with rainwater. My torch beam steadied on the figure. It was Morris. Had to be, given the height and build. The dark raincoat I remembered him wearing at the station. But something was wrong with the way he stood. Too still, too straight, like a mannequin placed in the forest rather than a living person. "Morris." I called again, louder this time. "Are you all right? We've been searching for you." Still no response. Still that steady clicking sound. We were about 15 meters away now, close enough to see details. He was facing away from us, toward a small opening in the trees where a shaft of light, impossible given the hour and the weather, illuminated a patch of forest floor. "What is he photographing?" Chun whispered. "There's nothing there." We were 10 meters away when Morris finally moved. Slowly, mechanically, he began to turn toward us. "Thank God," I said, relieved to see movement. "Morris, are you injured?" "We found your equipment." My words died as he completed his turn. It wasn't Morris. It couldn't be. The figure wore Morris's clothes, had Morris's build, but where face was only a blur, a smudge of features, as if someone had taken an eraser to photograph, removing all detail, all humanity. And its hands. They weren't holding a camera. The clicking sound was coming from the figure itself, from that blurred face, like a mouth mimicking the sound of shudder. Chun screamed. I think I might have too. We turned as one and ran, crashing back toward the trail, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, the clicking sound changed pitch, becoming faster and more excited. And then, God help me, it started to follow. I don't remember much of the rest of our descent. Just fragments, slipping in mud, catching myself on tree trunks, Chen's ragged breathing matching my own as we fled downward through darkness and rain, the clicking sound pursuing us, sometimes seeming to fall behind, sometimes coming from directly beside us, as if whatever made it could move through the forest in ways we couldn't comprehend. We reached the main ranger station just after midnight, soaked, exhausted, scratched from branches and falls. The night ranger took one look at our faces and called for backup without needing to be told. The official report states that Daniel Morris remains missing, presumed to have fallen from a cliff where his tripod was found. The treacherous conditions prevented a full-scale search, and by the time weather improved enough to send in a cliff rescue team, there was no sign of his body. It was theorized that it had been carried away by the swollen stream at the base of the cliff. The report makes no mention of what Chun and I encountered in the forest. How could it? Who would believe us? But there's one detail I've never shared with anyone, not even Chun. The memory card we found in the shelter, when I checked it later, alone, it contained just one image. The metadata showed it had been taken at 3:17 a.m. the night Morris disappeared. Hours after sunset, in conditions where photography should have been impossible. The image showed the summit of Raven's Peak, perfectly clear despite the storm, bathed in an unnatural light that seemed to come from all directions at once. And standing at the center of the frame was a figure, not Morris, but something that wore his general shape like an ill-fitting suit. Its face was a blur, its hands outstretched toward the camera as if an invitation or supplication. Behind it, half hidden in mist, were other figures, dozens of them, all with the same blurred faces, all with the same outstretched hands. I deleted the image immediately, told myself I'd imagined it, that the card had been corrupted by rain and moisture. But sometimes, on nights like this, when the rain falls heavily and darkness gathers at my windows, I hear it, that soft mechanical clicking, like a camera shutter, like something mimicking a camera shutter. It comes from the edge of the forest behind my cabin, comes and goes with the heaviest rainfall, as if something is out there capturing images of my home, watching, waiting, and sometimes when the rain is particularly heavy and the night particularly dark, I think I see a figure standing just at the tree line, a figure with a blurred face, hands outstretched, taking pictures of me. The rain's getting heavier now. Can you hear it? That rhythmic drumming on your roof? Listen carefully. Is that really just rain? The rain sounds different deep in the forest. Have you ever noticed that? The way it creates layers of sound. The patter on leaves high above, the heavier drops falling from branch to branch, the gentle hiss as it finally reaches the forest floor. I find myself listening to rain a lot these days, analyzing it, making sure it's just rain I'm hearing and not something else. I've been a forest ranger at Pinewood National Park for nearly 14 years now. It's a vast stretch of wilderness, over 80,000 acres of dense forest, hidden valleys, and mist-shrouded mountains. Beautiful country, dangerous country, if you don't respect it. Most of my job involves fairly routine tasks, maintaining trails, assisting hikers, occasionally rescuing someone who's twisted an ankle or become disoriented. But there are other aspects to ranger work that they don't put in the brochures. The searches that don't end well. The things we sometimes find in the remote corners of the park. The stories we tell each other in quiet voices when the day's work is done. This is one of those stories. One I've never told anyone outside the service. And even then, only to a handful of colleagues who might understand, who might believe me. It happened 3 years ago, during what had been the wettest autumn in park history. 6 straight weeks of rain had transformed the landscape. Normally dry creek beds had become raging torrents. Trails had washed out, and the constant moisture had produced an explosion of fungi. Some varieties I'd never seen before despite my years in the park. Due to the hazardous conditions, most of the park had been closed to visitors. Only the main road and a few well-maintained trails near the visitor center remained open. The rest was deemed too dangerous until conditions improved, which is why the call struck me as odd from the beginning. It came through on a Wednesday evening, just as I was finishing my paperwork for the day. A woman, her voice tense with barely controlled panic, reporting that her brother hadn't returned from a hike in the northeastern section of the park, an area that had been officially closed for over a month. He said it would just be a day hike, she explained, words tumbling over each other. He wanted to photograph the waterfalls after all the rain. Said they'd be spectacular right now. Ma'am, I said gently, the northeastern section is currently closed to all visitors due to hazardous conditions. There are clear signs posted at all trail entrances. I know, she said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. I told him that Mason doesn't. He doesn't always follow rules, especially when it comes to his photography. I took down the details. Mason Palmer, 36, experienced hiker and amateur photographer. He'd set out early that morning, telling his sister he'd be back by sunset. It was now nearly 9 p.m., fully dark. He hadn't returned or called. Do you know which trailhead he was planning to use? I asked. He mentioned Blackwater Trail, she replied. Said something about it being the quickest route to the Upper Falls. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Blackwater was one of the more treacherous trails, even in good conditions. Steep, poorly marked in places, with several stream crossings that would now be dangerous, fast-moving rivers. And the Upper Falls she mentioned would be a raging torrent after all this rain. Protocol dictated waiting until morning to begin a search. Sending rangers into that terrain in darkness during ongoing rain would be risking more lives. But something in the woman's voice and my own knowledge of just how dangerous the conditions would be for someone stranded out there made me decide to at least do a preliminary check. I'll drive out to the Blackwater trailhead and see if his vehicle is still there. I told her. If it is, we'll organize a search team for First Light tomorrow. Thank you, she said, relief evident in her voice. His car is a blue Honda Civic, New Jersey plates. I radioed my plans to dispatch, pulled on my rain gear, and headed out. The drive to the northeastern section took about 40 minutes. The last 15 on unpaved forest roads that become a quagmire of mud and standing water. The rain, which had lightened briefly that afternoon, was falling heavily again, drumming on the roof of my vehicle, reducing visibility to just a few meters beyond my headlights. The Blackwater trailhead was deserted when I arrived. No vehicles in the small gravel parking area, not even tire tracks in the mud, to suggest anyone had been there recently. I did a careful sweep with my torch just to be certain, but found nothing to indicate that Mason Palmer had been there. I was about to radio dispatch with my findings when I noticed something, a faint glow through the trees, a short distance down the trail. Flashlight light, perhaps, or the light from a mobile phone. Hello, I called out, directing my torch beam toward the light. Park Ranger, is someone there? No response but the steady drumming of rain. I hesitated. Procedure said I should return to my vehicle, report my findings, and let the organized search team handle it in the morning. But if that was Palmer, possibly injured or disoriented, decision made, I radioed my position and intention to do a brief inspection of the immediate trail area, then set out toward the mysterious light, my torch cutting a weak yellow path through the darkness and rain. The Blackwater Trail begins innocuously enough, a well-maintained path that winds through mature pine forest. But it quickly becomes more challenging, descending steeply into the river valley, before climbing again toward the ridgeline where the falls are located. In current conditions, I knew both the descent and the climbs would be treacherous, slick with mud and running water. I'd gone perhaps 200 meters when I came upon the source of the light I'd seen. Not a torch or phone, but a small LED lantern hanging from a tree branch beside the trail. It was a kind sold in camping stores, designed for illuminating a tent or campsite. Why would someone hang a lantern here, so close to the trailhead, and then leave it? Hello. I called again, louder this time. Park Ranger, if you can hear me, please respond. Nothing but the rain and darkness answered. I examined the lantern carefully. It was new looking, still fairly dry despite the rain, suggesting it hadn't been hanging there long. Its position, precisely at eye level beside the trail, seemed deliberate, as if it had been placed specifically to be found. I was about to take it down when I noticed something on the ground directly beneath it. A small object half buried in mud. I crouched for a closer look. It was a radio, not a mobile phone, but an actual two-way radio, similar to the model I carried myself. Newer, though more sophisticated. I picked it up carefully, wiping mud from its display. The power was on, the battery indicator showing a full charge. I checked the frequency. It was set to the emergency channel used by park rangers. Hello, I said into the radio. This is Ranger Mitchell at Blackwater Trailhead. Anyone copy? Static replied, broken by what might have been a voice. Too faint, too fragmented to make out any words. I adjusted the volume. Tried again. This is Ranger Mitchell. If you can hear me, please identify yourself. More static, but this time, unmistakably, a voice emerged from the white noise. Help, I'm at the falls, can't move. The transmission was weak, breaking up, but the message was clear enough. Someone was in trouble at the falls, about 3 miles up the trail. I radio dispatch immediately, reporting what I'd found and heard. The response was immediate and emphatic. Do not attempt to reach the falls alone. Mark the locations of found items. Return to the vehicle. Wait for the search team being assembled now. All reasonable instructions. The sensible course of action. And yet, please, Cole, bleeding. The voice came to the radio again, weaker now, edged with pain or fear, or both. If it was Palmer, injured and alone up there, every minute could matter in this weather. Hypothermia would set in quickly, and if he was bleeding, I made a decision that, in retrospect, was either the bravest or most foolish in my career. I would follow the trail, quickly but carefully, and try to establish better radio contact as I got closer to the falls. I wouldn't attempt any difficult crossings or climbs without backup, but I might be able to get close enough to better assess the situation, maybe provide guidance to the injured party about immediate first aid or shelter. I radioed my intentions to dispatch, ignoring the immediate objections, then took both the lantern and the found radio and started up the trail a fast walk, my torch beam sweeping the path ahead for hazards. The rain intensified as I moved deeper into the forest, the canopy above offering less and less protection as the path descended toward a river valley. The trail itself became increasingly treacherous. In places, it had been transformed into a shallow stream, the rushing water having washed away the softer soil, leaving exposed roots and rocks that threatened to twist an ankle with every step. I tried the radio periodically, hoping to reestablish contact with whoever had sent that plea for help. Sometimes I thought I caught fragments of response, single words, gasping breaths, but nothing clear enough to be certain it wasn't just static and my own hopeful imagination. After about 40 minutes of careful progress, I reached the first major obstacle, Blackwater River itself. Swollen with rainwater, a churning mass of dark water, and debris where normally stood a placid stream easily crossed on stepping stones. The trail continued on the other side, climbing steeply toward the ridge where the falls cascaded down from the highlands. There was no safe way across, not alone, not in the dark, not with the river in this state. I raised the radio again. This is Ranger Mitchell. I've reached the river crossing. It's impassable in current conditions. If you can hear me, help is coming, but it may not arrive until morning. Try to find shelter. Stay as warm and dry as possible. Over. I waited, hoping for a response. For long moments, there was nothing but static. Then, suddenly clear, as if the sender had moved to a position with better signal. I see your light. The voice was male, tense with what might have been pain or fear, but surprisingly steady given the circumstances. But what caught my attention even more was what he'd said. He could see my light, which meant he wasn't at the falls. 3 miles further up the trail, he was much closer. I played my torch across the opposite bank of the river, scanning for any sign of movement or reflection. Nothing but rain-slick rocks and the dark mass of forest beyond. "I don't see you," I said into the radio. "Where are you? Can you signal somehow?" "I'm above you," his voice replied. "To your left, near the old overlook." I redirected my beam upward and leftward, where a steep, rocky slope rose alongside the river. About 50 feet up, there was indeed an overlook, a flat outcropping that offered views of the valley in better weather. Now it was just a darker shape against a rainy night, and there at its edge, I caught a brief flash of reflection, light bouncing off something metallic or reflective. "I see you," I confirmed, keeping my beam fixed on that spot. "Are you injured? What's your situation?" "Fell." The voice said, weaker now, as if the effort of the previous transmissions had taken a toll. "Trying to reach the falls. Slipped on the upper trail. I think my leg is broken. Can't walk." That would be Mason Palmer. I assumed the missing photographer, who had indeed been trying to reach the falls as his sister had said. "Help is on the way," I assured him. "A rescue team should be here within the hour. Can you stay warm and dry where you are?" There's a small cave, he replied. More of an overhang, really, keeping the worst of the rain off. But I'm very cold. Hypothermia was a real risk in these conditions. I needed to reach him, or at least get supplies to him, before the rescue team arrived. Is there any way to reach your position from this side of the river? I asked, studying the slope that led up to the overlook. It looked treacherous, steep, slick with rainwater, covered in loose stones and scree that would provide uncertain footing at best. No, came the immediate reply. Only from the trail on the other side. You'll have to cross. I studied the raging river again. No way to cross. The current would sweep me away in seconds. No fallen trees or other natural bridges within sight. My only option would be to try to find a narrower section, perhaps upstream, where crossing might be possible. I'm going to try to find a crossing point, I said into the radio. I'll keep in touch. Hang on. I moved upstream, following the riverbank, my torch beam searching for any possible crossing point. The ground was treacherous, mud sucking at my boots. Hidden roots and rocks threatened to trip me with every step. The rain continued unabated, soaking through my waterproofs, running down my face, limiting visibility to just a few meters beyond my light. After about 10 minutes, I found what I was looking for, a section where the river narrowed slightly, and a series of large boulders created a precarious but possible crossing, not without risk, but manageable with extreme caution. I radioed my intentions to both dispatch and Palmer, then secured my equipment as best I could and began the crossing, moving from boulder to boulder with deliberate care, testing each foothold before committing my weight. Halfway across, balanced on a rain-slick stone with the dark water rushing just inches below my boots, I heard something that made me freeze, a sound cutting to the constant rush of the river and patter of rain. A mechanical click, followed by a whirring noise, the sound of a camera shutter, and film advance. I played my torch in the direction of the sound, the riverbank I just left. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, my beam caught a reflection, the lens of a camera, partially hidden among the trees at the edge of the bank. Hello, I called out, my voice nearly lost in the river's roar. Is someone there? No response, but the lens remained fixed on me like a watching eye. This made no sense. If Palmer was injured on the overlook, as he claimed over the radio, how could he or his camera be on the bank I just left? Unless it wasn't Palmer. A cold that had nothing to do with the rain seeped into my bones. I raised the radio. Palmer? Are you still there? I'm here, came the immediate reply, the voice strained with what sounded like pain. Have you found a crossing yet? The voice came through the radio clearly, but so did the sound of a camera shutter from the riverbank, perfectly synchronized with the radio transmission, as if someone were taking photos each time Palmer spoke, or as if the voice I was hearing wasn't a voice at all, but something else entirely. I redirected my torch toward the overlook where I'd seen the reflection earlier. Nothing there now, no movement, no glint of light on metal or glass. Had I imagined it? My radio crackled again. Are you still there, Ranger? I think I hear something moving in the forest near me. Another click and we're from the riverbank. Perfectly timed with the transmission. I'm still here, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The rescue team should be arriving at the trailhead any minute now. Just stay where you are. I needed to get off these rocks, away from the middle of the river where I was exposed and vulnerable. But which bank? The one I'd left, where something with a camera lurked among the trees, or the far bank, leading toward an overlook where someone or something was claiming to be an injured Palmer. The decision was made for me by a sudden shift in the river's flow, a surge of water bearing branches and debris, smashing against the rocks of my makeshift crossing. The boulder beneath my feet shuddered with the impact. I had seconds at most before it was dislodged completely. I leaped to the far bank, barely making the distance, my boots sliding in mud as I scrambled away from the water's edge. Behind me, the boulder I'd been standing on was swept away, tumbling downstream in the churning current. I was committed now. The only way back was to find the proper trail crossing a mile downstream, or to continue upward toward the overlook and whatever waited there. I raised the radio again. Palmer, I've crossed the river. I'm going to try to reach your position. Keep talking so I can navigate to you. Silence. Not even static. I checked the radio. Still powered on. Still set to the correct frequency. But now completely dead. I looked back across the river, toward where I'd seen the camera lens. Still there, still watching. And now, visible in my torch beam, a hand holding the camera. A pale hand. Too pale, its proportions subtly wrong. Fingers too long, joints too flexible. I turned and began climbing the slope toward the overlook. No longer trying to be cautious, just moving as fast as possible away from whatever was watching from the opposite bank. The ground was steep, treacherous with loose stones and mud. I slipped repeatedly, tearing my uniform, scraping my hands raw on rocks as I scrambled for purchase. Behind me, across the river, I heard it, a voice calling out, using the exact words I'd spoken into the radio earlier. My own voice played back to me like a recording. This is Ranger Mitchell. I've reached the river crossing. It's impassable in current conditions. I climbed faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps, rain and sweat blinding me. Above, the dark shape of the overlook loomed, perhaps 30 feet higher. I could see the overhang that Palmer, or whatever was claiming to be Palmer, had mentioned, a shallow depression in the rock face, just enough to provide minimal shelter from the rain. And there, huddled within it, a figure, human-shaped in the darkness, details obscured. Palmer? I called, my voice shaking. Mason Palmer? The figure shifted slightly, but didn't respond. I approached cautiously, torch beam fixed on the overhang. Try and make out details through the curtain of rain. It was a man, or had been. He wore hiking clothes, high-end outdoor gear, now torn and mud-stained. His face was turned away from me, toward the rock wall. But I could see enough to tell he had dark hair, a beard, a camera. An expensive DSLR with multiple lenses lay beside him, along with a backpack that had been partially emptied, its contents scattered around the small shelter. Palmer, I said again, reaching the edge of the overhang. I'm Ranger Mitchell. Help is coming. Are you injured? Slowly, so slowly, he turned toward me. I've tried many times since that night to explain what I saw. What was wrong with a face that turned to meet my torch beam? The best I can do is to say it wasn't a face at all, but an approximation of one. As if something had studied human features, but didn't quite understand how they fit together. The eyes were too wide, too unblinking. The mouth moved wrong when it spoke, like a poorly synced dub in a foreign film. I've been waiting for you. Ranger Mitchell, it said, in that same voice I'd heard over the radio. Perfect, too perfect, like a recording rather than natural speech. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the rain-slick stone. The thing that wasn't Palmer rose to its feet in a single, fluid motion that no human with a broken leg could have managed. Don't leave, it said, still in that perfect, recorded voice. We've only just met. It took a step toward me, moving with a grace that belied the treacherous footing. I raised my torch like a weapon, though I knew it would be useless against whatever this was. Where you? I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. It cocked its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those too wide, too still eyes. I'm Mason Palmer, it said. I'm exactly who I said I was. Behind me, from the direction of the river, I heard my own voice again, played back with perfect fidelity. Palmer, I've crossed the river. I'm going to try to reach your position. The thing on the overlook smiled, an expression that stretched its not-quite-right face in ways that made my stomach lurch. And there's another one, it said, nodding toward the river. We've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who would come alone at night in the rain. Another one. The implication hit me like a physical blow. There were two of them, and they had been working together, one using the radio to lure me across the river, the other waiting on the bank with a camera that I suddenly realized had been recording my voice each time I use a radio, recording for playback. What do you want? I asked, still backing away, searching desperately for an escape route that wouldn't send me tumbling down the slope. To learn, it said simply, to become. It gestured toward the scattered contents of Palmer's backpack. Among them, I now saw a wallet, open to reveal a driver's license with Palmer's photo. He taught us some. You'll teach us more. It took another step toward me, hand outstretched. I noticed the first time that its fingers ended not in nails, but in something else, something sharp and chitinous, like insect mandibles. From below, by the river, came a sound, multiple camera shutters firing in rapid succession, and then, impossibly, my torch caught movement on the slope below, something climbing toward us with inhuman speed, moving on all fours like an insect, yet bearing the unmistakable shape of a human photographer. Camera still held in one distorted hand. I ran. Blind panic took over, and I simply ran, not caring about the treacherous footing, not caring about the sheer drop to my right, just needing to put distance between myself and those things. My torch beam bounced wildly as I half ran, half slid down the other side of the overlook, finding a game trail that wound through dense undergrowth. Behind me, I heard movement in the brush, not the heavy crashing of human pursuit, but something lighter, faster, more deliberate. The rain continued to fall, drumming on leaves, obscuring other sounds, making it impossible to tell how close my pursuers might be. I don't know how long I ran, or in what direction. Time and direction lost meaning in the darkness and rain. But eventually, miraculously, I stumbled onto a park access road, a gravel service road used by maintenance vehicles, rarely traveled by visitors. I followed it, jogging now rather than running, my lungs burning, legs trembling with exhaustion. Headlights appeared in the distance, a parked vehicle. The search team, coming to find me after I failed to respond to radio calls. I flagged them down, collapsed in the back seat, tried to explain between gasping breaths what I'd encountered. I don't think they believed me. Not really. They nodded, exchanged glances, focused on getting me back to the ranger station where I could be checked for hypothermia, concussion, other conditions that might explain my disoriented state. The official report states that Mason Palmer was never found, despite extensive searches over the following weeks. His vehicle was discovered 3 days later, hidden on an abandoned logging road 2 miles from the Blackwater trailhead, suggesting he had deliberately evaded the closure signs, just as his sister had feared. The report makes no mention of the lantern or the radio I found, no mention of the camera-wielding thing by the river, or the not-quite-human figure in the overlook. Those details were deemed inconsistent with established facts and attributed to stress and possible mild hypothermia. But I know what I saw. I know what was out there in the rain and darkness. And I know they're still there, waiting, because 3 days after that night, a package was delivered to the ranger station addressed to me. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a high-quality print showing me in midstream, balanced on that rain-slick boulder, torch in hand, looking directly at the camera with an expression of dawning horror on my face. Scrawled on the back, in handwriting that was almost but not quite human, were 6 words. We're still learning. Come teach us. I transferred to a different park the following month. Put as much distance as I could between myself and Pinewood. But on nights like this, when the rain drums against my roof and windows, I wonder about those things in the forest. Whether they're still there, whether they're still learning, still becoming. And I wonder how many faces they were now. Listen to the rain. Really listen. Is it just water falling from the sky? Or is that something else you're hearing beneath the steady patter? Something mimicking the rain, practicing learning, becoming. The rain against my window tonight reminds me of that night at Darkwater Ridge. Have you ever really listened to rain? Not just heard it, but truly listened? The way it creates different sounds depending on what it strikes. The sharp patter on glass, the duller drumming on wood, the almost musical tinkle as it drips from leaves onto stone. Rain has so many voices, but that night in those woods, it spoke with just one voice, and it called my name. I've been a forest ranger at Elmwood National Park for 17 years. Most of that time at the Eastern Outpost, the more developed area where tourists come for weekend camping trips and easy day hikes. But 8 years ago, I was temporarily assigned to the Western Sector, covering for a colleague on medical leave. The Western Sector is different, wilder, more remote. Fewer marked trails, denser forest, deeper ravines. The locals call it the Old Forest and speak of it with a respect that borders on reverence. It was late October, near the end of my 3-month assignment. The tourist season had wound down. The autumn rains had set in, and most of my work involved routine patrols and maintenance, preparing the remote outpost for the coming winter. The call came through just after 4 p.m. A hiker reported missing by his wife when he failed to return from a day trek near Darkwater Ridge. William Holloway, 42, experienced outdoorsman, had set out early that morning to photograph the ridge at sunrise. His wife became concerned when he hadn't returned by mid-afternoon, especially with the weather forecast predicting heavy rain by nightfall. He knows the area well, she told me over the phone, her voice tight with worry. He never stays out this late, especially not with rain coming. I assured her we'd begin searching immediately. Darkwater Ridge was about a 90-minute hike from the nearest road, a steep, heavily wooded area overlooking a deep valley, popular with photographers for its dramatic vistas, but challenging terrain, especially in wet conditions. My colleague, Ranger Patel, volunteered to join the search. We gathered our gear, torches, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, extra water, and set out just before 5 p.m. The sky was already darkening. Heavy clouds building on the horizon. The air thick with a metallic scent that precedes rain. Think he got lost? Patel asked as we hiked the main trail that would lead us to the ridge turnoff. I considered for a moment. Holloway's wife said he knows the area well. Might be an injury. Twisted ankle, maybe, or equipment failure. Let's hope it's something simple, Patel replied. I don't fancy spending the night out here in a downpour. The first drops began to fall just as we reached the turnoff for Darkwater Ridge. Light at first, more mist than proper rain, but the darkening sky promised much more to come. We increased our pace, calling Holloway's name periodically as we climbed the increasingly steep trail. Darkwater Ridge is named for the unusual black stones that line the streams running down its slopes. Volcanic rock that turns the water an inky black in certain lights. But some of the old-timers in nearby towns have other explanations for the name. They speak of strange echoes in the deep valleys, sounds that carry too far on still nights, lights where no light should be. The kind of local legends every wilderness area accumulates over the years. The kind I'd never put much stock in until that night. The rain intensified as we neared the top of the ridge. No longer a gentle mist, but a steady downpour that limited visibility and turned the trail slick and treacherous. We'd been calling for Holloway every 100 yards or so, but had heard nothing in response except the increasing roar of the rain on leaves. "Let's check the overlook first," I suggested, referring to a rocky outcropping near the ridge's highest point, a popular spot for photographers seeking dramatic landscape shots. If he was taking photos, that's where he'd likely be. Patel nodded, pulling his hood tighter against the rain. The overlook was empty when we reached it, no sign that anyone had been there recently. The view that would normally extend for miles across the valley was now obscured by sheets of rain and gathering darkness. We swept our torch beams across the area, checking for any equipment or signs of recent human presence. "Nothing," Patel said, voicing the obvious. Where to next? There were several possibilities. A small waterfall about half a mile north along the ridge, the stand of ancient pines to the south that was popular with wildlife photographers, or the network of smaller trails that descended into the valley below. Let's try the waterfall. I decided, with all this rain, it would be running spectacularly. Might attract a photographer. We backtracked to the main ridge trail and turned north, the rain now coming down in earnest, drumming on our hoods, reducing visibility to just a few yards beyond our torch beams. The trail narrowed, hugging the edge of the ridge, a steep drop-off just visible to our right, disappearing into misty darkness below. We'd walked perhaps a quarter mile when Patel suddenly stopped, raising a hand. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice nearly lost in the rain's steady roar. I listened, hearing nothing but water hitting leaves, hitting ground, hitting our rain gear. "What did you hear?" "A voice," he said, frowning. I thought someone called out. We stood still, listening intently. For several long moments, there was nothing unusual, just the rain. Then, faintly, I heard it too, a sound that might have been a human voice, coming from somewhere ahead of us on the trail. "Hello," I called out, my voice seeming small and ineffectual against the backdrop of rain. "Holloway, can you hear me?" We waited, listening. The sound came again. Definitely a voice, but too faint, too distorted by the rain to make out words. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the waterfall. "That has to be him," Patel said, already moving forward. I followed, both of us picking up our pace despite the treacherous footing. The trail grew more challenging as we proceeded, the ridge narrowing, the drop-off to our right becoming steeper. In places, the rain had transformed the path into a shallow stream, water flowing over rocks and exposed roots, threatening to sweep unwary feet from under them. The voice came again, clearer now as we drew closer to the waterfall. It was calling something repeatedly, not help as I'd expected, but what sounded like a name. "Sarah." I froze mid-step, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain running down my spine. Sarah's my name. A name that Holloway shouldn't know. A name that shouldn't be called out here in the darkness and the rain. "Did you hear that?" I asked Patel, my voice tight. He nodded, his expression confused. Sounded like, "Was it your name?" Before I could respond, the voice came again, unmistakable now. "Sarah, I see you, Sarah." It came from just around the bend in the trail ahead, where the path curved toward the waterfall. Patel and I exchanged glances. Something felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong, but we couldn't abandon a potentially injured hiker because of an unsettling coincidence. "Holloway?" I called again, moving forward more cautiously now. "William Holloway? This is Ranger Cooper. Are you injured?" No response with the rain. We continued forward, rounding the bend in the trail. The waterfall came into view, normally a modest cascade, now transformed by the rain into a roaring torrent of white water against black stone. The trail widened slightly here, forming a small clearing where hikers often stopped to rest and view the falls. And there at the edge of that clearing was a figure. It stood with its back to us, facing the falls, seemingly oblivious to the pouring rain. A human shape, tall, wearing what appeared to be dark hiking clothes. But something about its posture was wrong. Too still, too straight, like a statue of a person rather than a living being. "Holloway," Patel called, moving ahead of me. "Sir, are you all right?" The figure didn't turn, didn't acknowledge us in any way, just continued to stand motionless, facing the falls. We approached cautiously, our torch beams fixed on the unmoving figure. As we drew closer, I noticed something odd about the way our lights fell on it. They didn't seem to illuminate it properly, as if the light was being absorbed rather than reflected. "Sir," Patel said as we reached the edge of clearing, perhaps 15 feet from the figure. "Are you William Holloway? We're park rangers. Are you injured?" Slowly, with a fluidity that somehow seemed mechanical rather than natural, the figure began to turn toward us. I don't know what I expected to see as it turned. A confused hiker, perhaps, or an injured man grateful for rescue. What I saw instead stopped my breath in my throat. The figure had no face. Where features should have been was only smooth, blank skin, interrupted by what appeared to be a vertical slit where a mouth might be. No eyes, no nose, no expression. Just that terrible, impossible smoothness and that slit. And yet, somehow, I knew it was looking directly at me. "Sarah," it said, though the slit didn't move, didn't open. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah." Patel's torch slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the ground but miraculously remaining lit, its beam creating wild shadows as it rolled. He backed away, a stream of multilingual profanity escaping his lips. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to flee back down the trail as fast as the treacherous ground would allow. But I was transfixed, unable to look away from that blank face, that unmoving slit that somehow spoke my name. "What are you?" I whispered, the words escaping unbidden. The thing cocked its head at an impossible angle, as if considering the question. The movement was all wrong. Too fluid in some ways, too jerky in others, like something approximating human motion without fully understanding it. "I am William Holloway," it said, in a voice that sounded perfectly human yet deeply, intrinsically wrong. "I am what he became, what you will become." It took a step toward us. The movement was smooth, gliding, as if his feet didn't quite touch the ground. Patel broke from his trance first, grabbing my arm. "Run," he hissed. "Now!" We turned and fled, abandoning Patel's dropped torch, stumbling back along the rain-slicked trail with only my light to guide us. Behind us, that voice called again, now taking on a plaintive, almost childlike quality. "Don't leave, Sarah. I'm so alone here, so alone in the rain." We ran without speaking, without looking back, our boots slipping on wet stone and mud, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The rain seemed to intensify, becoming a solid wall of water that limited visibility to just a few feet beyond my frantically bobbing torch beam. We'd covered perhaps half the distance back to the main trail when Patel, who was leading our headlong flight, suddenly disappeared from my view with a startled cry. One moment he was there and the next gone, as if swallowed by the night and rain. I skidded to a halt, playing my torch beam desperately across the trail ahead. It revealed a section where the path had collapsed. A recent landslide, probably triggered by the heavy rain, had taken out about 6 feet of the trail, creating a gap that dropped straight down into darkness. "Patel," I shouted, dropping to my knees at the edge, directing my light downward. "Patel, can you hear me?" For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard his voice from below, pain-filled but alive. "Cooper, I'm on a ledge, about 15 feet down. I think my leg's broken." My torch beam caught him. a crumpled form on a narrow outcropping of rock that had arrested his fall. Beyond that ledge, the cliff continued down into misty darkness. The bottom lost of sight. "Hold on," I called. "I'm going to get a rope. Try to pull you up." I unslung my backpack, hands shaking as I searched for the emergency rope we carried for precisely such situations. Behind me, from the direction we'd fled, came that voice again, closer now. "Sarah, don't you want to see what you'll become, Sarah?" I worked faster, fingers fumbling with the rope, securing one end around a sturdy tree trunk near the edge of collapse. I had perhaps 2 minutes before whatever was pursuing us arrived. Less, if it moved faster than human pace. I'm lowering a rope. I called to Patel. "Can you secure around yourself?" "I'll try," came his strained reply. "But hurry. There's something down here with me. Something moving in the darkness." A fresh wave of terror washed over me. Not just one of them. Then, more than one. I lowered the rope as quickly as I dared, playing my torch beam down to help Patel locate it. I caught a glimpse of his face looking up, white with pain and fear, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "I've got it," he called after what seemed an eternity. "It's secured." I braced myself against a tree, prepared to haul him up, knowing it would be nearly impossible to lift his full weight alone, but desperate to try. Behind me, that voice was closer still, now accompanied by a sound like water moving in ways water should move, flowing uphill perhaps, or gathering itself into shapes. "Sarah, we only want to show you what the rain can make." I pulled on the rope with everything I had, muscles straining, boots digging into the muddy ground for purchase. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rope went slack in my hands. From below came a sound that will haunt me until my dying day. Patel screamed, cutting through the rain, a sound of pure terror that ended with horrible abruptness, as if a door had been slammed shut on it. "Patel!" I screamed, dropping to my knees at the edge, shining my torch down frantically. "Patel!" The ledge where he had lain was empty. The rope dangled loose, its end disappearing into the mist and darkness below. Of Patel, there was no sign. But there was something else on that ledge now. Something that had not been there before. A figure, similar to what we'd seen by the waterfall, but smaller, child-sized perhaps. It stood looking up at me, its featureless face gleaming wetly in my torch beam. And beside it, a second figure was forming, literally forming, as if the rain itself were gathering, coalescing into a human-like shape that grew more solid with each passing second. I scrambled backward from the edge, a sob tearing from my throat. From behind me came that voice again, now just yards away. "See, Sarah? See what we become." I ran. I abandoned the rope, abandoned my backpack, abandoned all thought of rescue or duty or responsibility. I ran with blind panic driving me, stumbling along the treacherous trail, my torch beam bouncing wildly, illuminating fragments of the path ahead for split seconds at a time. Behind me, that voice, no, voices now, a chorus of them, call my name with increasing urgency, increasing hunger. The sound of flowing water grew louder, not just the rain or the distant waterfall, but something else. Water moving with purpose, with intent, pursuing me through the darkness. I don't remember much of the rest of that flight. Just fragments, sliding down muddy slopes, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning, my legs shaking with exhaustion. At some point I broke out onto the main trail, wider and better maintained than the ridge path. At some point after that, I reached the trailhead where our vehicle waited. I fumbled the keys from my pocket, dropped them in the mud, retrieved them with shaking hands. Behind me, the voices had faded, left behind in the deep woods, but I could still hear them in my mind, calling my name with that terrible familiarity. The official report states that Ranger Amit Patel died in a tragic accident when a rain-weakened section of trail collapsed beneath him, sending him falling into a deep ravine. It states that his body was recovered 3 days later by a search and rescue team, over 200 feet below the trail, in a condition consistent with a high-velocity impact with rocks. The report makes no mention of William Holloway, no mention of faceless figures formed from rain, no mention of voices that knew my name. Those details I kept to myself, knowing how they would sound, knowing they would be attributed to trauma, to the psychological impact of watching a colleague fall to his death. I requested a transfer back to the eastern sector the following week. I've never returned to the western section of the park, never set foot on Darkwater Ridge again. But there are things I know now, things I wish I didn't. I know that the body they recovered wasn't Patel. Not really. It looked like him, had his identification, his clothing. But it wasn't him. It was something else, something that had taken his shape, his form, perhaps even his memories. I know this because 3 weeks after that night, I received a letter at my home address, an address that wasn't in any park records, that Patel had never known. The handwriting was his, precise and slightly slanted to the left as I'd seen on countless reports. But the words were not his. The rain remembers you, Sarah. It's learning your shape. One day, when the rain falls just right, you'll see yourself standing in your garden, watching through your window, and then you'll understand what we become. I moved the following month, changed my phone number, considered changing my name, but didn't. What good would it do against something that didn't need names to find you? That could take any shape, any form? I still work as a ranger, but only in the driest, most open parts of the park. I never patrol alone anymore, never stay out after dark when rain threatens. And on nights like this, when the rain falls heavily against my windows, I keep all the lights on and try not to look outside, because sometimes in the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something in my garden. A figure standing perfectly still amid the downpour, watching, waiting, learning my shape, and sometimes beneath the steady drum of rain on my roof. I think I hear voices calling my name. The rain is getting heavier now. Listen closely. Does it sound like just rain to you? Or can you hear it too? That whisper beneath the patter, that voice in the water, calling. The rain sounds different here, in the deep woods of Oak Ridge National Park. Listen to it for a moment, the way it filters through layers of ancient pine needles before reaching the ground, the hollow drumming against fallen logs, the gentle hiss as it strikes the surface of hidden pools. It creates a symphony of sorts, complex, ever-changing, almost like a language if you listen long enough. I've been listening to that language for nearly 20 years now. 2 decades as a forest ranger, the last 12 here at Oak Ridge. Most visitors see only the eastern sections, the well-maintained trails, the scenic overlooks, the comfortable campgrounds with their fire pits and picnic tables. Few venture into the western quadrant, where the trees grow older and closer together, where trails fade into undergrowth, and where the silence has a weight, a presence all its own. It was in that western quadrant that I encountered something I still cannot explain, something that has haunted me through countless rainy nights since. It began with a routine missing persons report. A solo hiker, Elaine Carson, 34, had returned from a 3-day trek into the western wilderness. Her sister reported her missing when she failed to check in at the agreed time. Nothing particularly unusual about the case. Experienced hikers occasionally misjudge time or distance, suffer minor injuries, or simply decide to extend their journey. But there was something in the sister's voice when I spoke with her, a tension, an unease that went beyond normal concern. Elaine wouldn't just not call, she insisted. And there's something else. What is it? I asked, pen poised over my instant report form. A hesitation on the line. You'll think I'm mad. Try me, I said. I've worked these with a long time. Not much surprises me anymore. Another pause, and she sent me a photo the night before I lost contact. It was dark, hard to make out, but there was someone standing between the trees, watching her campsite. A chill ran through me, though I kept my voice professional. Could have been a deer or another hiker. It was standing upright, the sister continued, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. And its eyes, her voice caught. They reflected the flash like an animal's would. I made a note, trying to keep any skepticism from my tongue. I'll need to see that photo. I've already sent it to the email address on the park website, she replied. But Ranger Taylor? Please find my sister. She wouldn't just vanish like this. I promised to begin searching immediately. The photo arrived while I was assembling my gear, blurry, dark as described, taken by the light of a campfire and a camera flash. It showed a standard backpacking tent, some equipment scattered around a small clearing, and yes, at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by trees, a shape that might have been a person, tall, unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still. 2 pinpricks of reflected light, where eyes would be. Probably just a trick of the light, I told myself. A tree trunk and branches forming a humanoid shape in the darkness. The eyes, nothing more than water droplets or sap reflecting the flash. Still, something about that image disturbed me deeply. I found myself returning to it, studying it, try to resolve those indistinct features into something familiar, something explainable. The weather forecast called for rain by evening, so I wasted no time. I noted Elaine's planned route in the logbook, packed my gear, and headed out. The trail she'd taken was one of the more challenging in the park, an old logging road that had been partially reclaimed by the forest, leading deep into a valley known locally as a hollow. The hollow has a certain reputation among park staff. Nothing official, nothing you'd find in reports or briefings. Just stories shared in low voices during quiet night shifts. Hikers who experienced lost time there. Unusual sounds that couldn't be attributed to known wildlife. Equipment failures that had no explanation. I'd always dismissed such tales as a kind of folklore that inevitably accumulates around wild places. The human mind dislikes mysteries, dislikes the vastness of nature and the smallness it makes us feel. We populate the unknown with phantoms to make it comprehensible. Or so I believed until that day. The first few miles of the trail were uneventful. The weather held, though the sky darkened steadily with approaching rain clouds. I maintained a brisk pace, calling Elaine's name periodically, checking for any signs of recent passage. Broken twigs, disturbed ground, discarded items. About 4 miles in, the trail begins to descend into the hollow, the terrain growing steeper, the forest denser. The trees here were old growth, massive pines and oaks that had somehow escaped the logging operations of the previous century. Their canopies created perpetual twilight, even at midday. And with the gathering storm clouds, the forest floor was cast in deep shadow. I found the first sign of Elaine Carson at the 6-mile mark, a small cairn of stacked stones beside the trail, a common enough marker left by hikers. But this one had been assembled recently. The exposed surfaces of the stones were still clean, not yet weathered or covered with a fine layer of moss that accumulates quickly in these damp woods. Encouraged, I pressed on, descending deeper into the hollow. The trail grew more challenging. Washouts from previous rains had eroded sections, forcing me to pick my way carefully across exposed roots and loose stones. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering gently on the leaves above. By the time I reached the valley floor, the gentle patter had become a steady drumming. The hollow spread out before me, A long, relatively flat expanse of forest bounded by steep ridges on three sides. A small stream wound through its center, now swelling with rainwater, according to her register route. Elaine had planned to camp somewhere near that stream on her first night. The rain intensified as I made my way toward the water. My torch beam seemed feeble against the deepening gloom, catching raindrops and cones of light that limited visibility rather than enhanced it. Still, I continued calling periodically. Elaine Carson, Park Ranger, can you hear me? My voice sounded flat, muffled by the rain and the dense vegetation. No response came but the steady drumming of water on leaves. I reached the stream and began to follow upstream, where the terrain was slightly higher, more suitable for camping. The rain had transformed a normally placid brook into a fast-flowing current, brown with silt and debris. I watched my footing carefully on the slick rocks of the bank. After about half a mile, I saw it, a flash of color that didn't belong among the greens and browns of the forest. I directed my torch toward it, revealing a tent pitched on a small rise about 20 yards from the stream. The same tent from the photograph. I realized royal blue, a lightweight backpacking model. Elaine, I called, approaching quickly now. Elaine Carson. No response. The tent entrance was zipped closed against the rain. I drew closer, noting the campsite organization. A tarp strung between trees had created a small, dry area where a camp stove and some supplies sat neatly arranged. A pair of hiking boots stood under the tarp's edge, placed carefully on a small square of waterproof fabric to keep them off the damp ground. Everything spoke of an experienced hiker, methodical and prepared. Nothing suggested panic or a hasty departure. Elaine, I called again, now at the tent's entrance. Park Ranger Taylor, are you inside? Nothing but the rain answered me. I unzipped the tent slowly, announcing my presence again as I did so. The interior was immaculate. Sleeping bag laid out neatly, backpack at his foot, personal items organized in small stuffed sacks along one side. A headlamp hung from the center loop of the tent ceiling. No sign of Elaine Carson. No sign of struggle or disturbance. Just an empty tent that looked as if its occupant had stepped out momentarily and might return at any second. But those boots under the tarp told a different story. No experienced hiker would wander these woods barefoot or in socks alone. Whatever had happened to Elaine, she hadn't simply gone for a walk. I examined the area around the campsite carefully, methodically expanding my search in concentric circles. The rain made it difficult. Any tracks or signs were being rapidly erased by the steady downpour. Still, I persisted, calling Elaine's name at regular intervals, my unease growing with each passing minute. About 30 yards from the campsite, I found something. A small digital camera, half hidden under the exposed roots of a massive oak. It was a compact model, the kind hikers often carry for documenting their journeys. And it was on, its battery still showing a partial charge. I turned it on and checked the most recent images. There were the expected shots, scenic vistas from higher elevations, interesting rock formations, particularly vibrant patch of wildflowers. And then, starting at around image number 37, something changed. The photos became more hurried, less composed. Many were blurry, as if taken while moving, and they all showed the same thing. Glimpses of something tall and thin moving between distant trees. Something that, even in those unclear images, did not move like a human, its proportions subtly wrong, its limbs too long, too fluid. The final image, number 43, was the clearest of the sequence. Taken with flash, it showed the same figure, now much closer to the camera, standing at the edge of a small clearing. It was humanoid but wrong, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs disproportionately long. its head oddly small for its frame. Where a face should have been was only a featureless darkness, save for two reflective points of light where eyes might be. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain, soaking through my waterproofs. This was the same figure from the photo Elaine had sent her sister, but closer now, clearer. I slipped the camera into my pocket and surveyed the surrounding forest with new wariness. The rain had intensified again, reducing visibility to just a few yards in any direction. The light was fading rapidly as evening approached. The storm hastened the arrival of darkness. I knew I should return to Elaine's campsite, radio for backup, and prepare to spend the night there before expanding the search in daylight. That would be the sensible, protocol-adherent course of action. But something, call it intuition, call it folly, compelled me to continue a bit further in the direction the camera had been pointing when that final photo was taken. The ground sloped gently upward here, away from the stream, toward the ridge that formed the eastern boundary of the hollow. The rain created small rivulets that wound between tree roots, carrying dead leaves and small debris downhill. I picked my way carefully, one hand on my torch, the other occasionally steadying myself against tree trunks. The trees began to thin slightly as I ascended, allowing marginally better visibility. I was about to turn back, to return to the relative shelter of Elaine's camp, when I saw it. A flash of color ahead that didn't belong. Not the blue of the tent this time, but a pale yellow, the color of the rain jacket Elaine had been wearing in the sister's photos of her setting out on her hike. I moved toward it quickly, playing my torch beam ahead of me. The yellow resolved into a rain jacket, hung with strained precision over a low-hanging branch. Not dropped, not discarded in haste, but deliberately placed, the arms spread wide as if in welcome or supplication. "Elaine!" I called, my voice instinctively dropping to little more than a whisper. "Elaine Carson?" I approached the jacket cautiously. It was indeed the same one from the photos, an expensive high-end model with distinctive reflective piping along the seams. Like the tent, like the boots, it showed no signs of struggle or damage, just a rain jacket, carefully removed and placed on a branch in the middle of a storm. I was reaching for it when I noticed something on the ground directly beneath. A small notebook, its cover protected from the rain by a clear plastic sleeve. A journal or trail diary, I assumed. I crouched to retrieve it, my torch balanced carefully to illuminate both the book and my immediate surroundings. The notebook was filled with Elaine's neat handwriting. Daily entries detailing her hike, observations about flora and fauna, sketches of interesting landmarks. The entries were methodical, precise, those of an experienced outdoorswoman recording her journey. Until the final entry. The handwriting here was different, hurried, irregular, pressing so hard into the paper that it had torn through in places. It's watching me, always watching. I see it between the trees, standing so still. Thought it was a deer at first, or a bear, but it's not. God help me, it's not. It doesn't move like anything alive should move. And I think it's getting closer each time I see it. I've started taking pictures. Evidence. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back. The entry ended there. The final word trailing off the page as if the writer had been interrupted mid-thought. I closed the notebook with shaking hands and tucked it into my pocket alongside the camera. As I straightened, my torch beam caught something at the edge of its reach. A disturbance in the undergrowth. A narrow path leading further upslope away from the main trail. Not an animal track. The breaks in the vegetation were too high, too deliberate. I hesitated, every instinct now screaming caution. Night was falling rapidly, the rain showing no signs of abating. Protocol, training, basic survival sense, all dictated returning to the campsite, radioing for backup, waiting until daylight to continue the search. Instead, I found myself following that narrow path, drawn forward by a compulsion I couldn't name. The ground grew steeper, rockier, the trees more widely spaced as I ascended toward the ridgeline. My torch beam bounced off wet leaves and stone, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of my light's motion. The path ended abruptly at a small clearing, not natural, but clearly man-made. The undergrowth had been removed, the ground tamped flat, and at its center stood a circle of stones, carefully arranged, each about the size of a human head. In the center of the circle was a pile of clothing, not just Elaine's, I realized with growing horror, but others as well. Different sizes, styles, all neatly folded. Some appeared relatively new. Others were in various states of decay, as if they had been there for months or even years. And arranged carefully atop this pile was a collection of personal items: watches, jewelry, wallets, cameras, phones. The kind of things a person would be carrying on them. The kind of things that would identify them. I stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, rain pounding against my hood, my torch beam fixed on that terrible arrangement. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, to find some rational explanation that didn't involve malice or madness. That's when I felt it, a subtle change in the atmosphere. Not a sound, not a movement, but a presence, a certainty that I was no longer alone. Slowly, fighting against every instinct that screamed at me to run, I turned, swinging my torch in a wide arc around the clearing's edge. And there it was, standing perfectly still between two tall pines at the clearing's far side, exactly as the camera had captured it. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin, limbs too long for its frame, head too small, face a featureless shadow except for those reflective points where eyes should be. It didn't move as my torch beam settled on it. Didn't react in any way. Just stood watching, its outline strangely indistinct against the darkness beyond, as if it weren't quite solid, or as if the boundary between it and the surrounding night was somehow permeable. I should have run, should have drawn my service pistol, should have shouted or radioed for help, or done any of the 100 things my training had prepared me for. Instead, I spoke to it. Where is she? My voice emerged as little more than a whisper. Where's Elaine Carson? It remained motionless for a long moment. Then, with fluidity that was utterly inhuman, it raised one elongated arm and pointed, not at the pile of clothing, as I had feared, but further up the slope, toward a ridgeline that loomed dark against the rainy sky. I don't know why I believed it. Don't know why I didn't immediately retreat, call for backup, return with a full search team in daylight. But something in that gesture conveyed absolute certainty, absolute truth. It was showing me the way. Is she alive? I asked, my voice stronger now. The figure didn't respond in any conventional way. It simply lowered its arm and stepped backward, seeming to recede into the darkness between the trees without actually moving, as if the distance between us was expanding independently of its motion. And then it was gone, leaving me alone in the clearing with that terrible circle of stones and belongings of people who had wandered into these woods and never wandered out again. I knew what I should do. Every protocol, every training scenario dictated my next actions. Mark the location, retreat to the campsite, radio for backup, wait for a proper evidence response team. Instead, I found myself continuing upward, following a barely discernible path that led toward the ridgeline. My torch beam swept frantically from side to side, catching nothing but rain and trees and the occasional gleam of wet stone. My breath came in ragged gasps, partly from the exertion to climb, partly from the fear that gripped me. The trees thinned as I neared the ridge top, giving way to a jumble of weather-worn boulders and scrubby vegetation that managed to survive in thin soil. The rain had lessened to a fine mist, the cloud ceiling lifting slightly, allowing faint moonlight to penetrate. And there, outlined against a lighter sky, I saw a human figure, not the impossible, elongated shape in the forest below, but a normal human silhouette, seated on a boulder at the very edge of the ridge. "Elaine," I called, scrambling forward. "Elaine Carson?" The figure turned slowly, revealing the face of a woman in her mid-30s, pale, drawn, but unmistakably alive. Her expression was one of mild surprise, as if she'd been interrupted during a moment of private contemplation. "Are you Ranger Taylor?" she asked, her voice perfectly calm, perfectly normal. "My sister said you might come looking for me." I stared at her in disbelief. This woman, apparently uninjured, apparently unbothered by the rain or the darkness or her strange surroundings, was sitting calmly on a ridge in the middle of the night, miles from her campsite, without her rain jacket or any equipment. "Elaine," I said carefully, approaching slowly, "your sister is worried about you. You missed your check-in. I found your campsite, your belongings. What are you doing up here?" She smiled, a small, secretive expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Watching," she replied simply. "It's quite beautiful from up here, don't you think?" I followed her gaze out across the hollow. From this elevation, we could see the entire valley spread below us, a sea of treetops occasionally illuminated by faint moonlight as the clouds shifted. It was indeed beautiful in a wild, primeval way, but something was moving among those trees. Multiple somethings, tall, thin figures, gliding between trunks with that same unnatural fluidity I'd witnessed in the clearing. Dozens of them, perhaps more, moving in complex patterns that almost resembled a dance. "What are they?" I whispered, unable to look away from the hypnotic motion. "I don't know," Elaine replied, her voice dreamy, distant. "They found me on my first night, stood around my tent, watching. I was terrified at first, took photos, tried to document them. But then I understood." "Understood what?" I asked, tearing my gaze away from the figures below to look at her. Her eyes, when she turned to me, were different now, darker, deeper, with a strange reflective quality that caught the minimal light. "They're lonely," she said simply. "They've been here so long, watching the trees grow, watching the seasons change, watching people come and go. They just want someone to stay, someone to watch with them." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain or the night air. "Elaine," I said carefully, "I need you to come with me now. Your sister is waiting. We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere warm." She shook her head, that small smile returning. "I am safe," she said, "safer than I've ever been. And I'm exactly where I need to be." She turned back to the view, her profile sharp against the night sky. "You could stay too," she added, as if offering a casual invitation to coffee. "There's room for more watchers. There always is." I took a deliberate step backward, then another. "I need to get back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Others will be looking for me if I don't check in soon." Elaine nodded without turning. "Of course. They'll come looking. They always do. And then there will be more of us." I turned and fled then, all pretense of professional calm abandoned. I half ran, half slid down the steep slope, torch beam bouncing wildly, occasionally catching glimpses of tall, thin figures among the trees, watching, always watching, but making no move to impede my flight. I reached Elaine's campsite in a fraction of the time it had taken me to climb to the ridge. Without pausing, I continued past it, following the main trail back toward the park entrance. The rain had stopped completely now, but water still dripped from branches overhead. Each drop distinct, almost deliberate in its timing. Drip, 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 like something counting, measuring, waiting. I didn't stop running until I reached the ranger station shortly after dawn. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched from branches I'd barely noticed in my headlong flight. I reported finding the empty campsite, but said nothing of the ridge, the stone circle, the watching figures in the forest. Nothing of Elaine Carson sitting calmly above it all with those reflective eyes. The official search began an hour later. 3 teams, working in a grid pattern outward from the campsite. They found nothing. No stone circle, no path leading upward, no pile of personal belongings, and certainly no sign of Elaine Carson. The case remains officially open. Elaine listed among the handful of hikers who disappear in wilderness areas each year without explanation. Her sister still calls occasionally, asking if there's been any progress. I tell her no, and it's the only honest part of my interactions with her. I requested a transfer to the eastern section of the park the following month. I don't go into the hollow anymore. Don't walk the western trails, especially not when rain threatens. But sometimes on nights like this, when the rain falls steadily against my cabin roof, I find myself drawn to the window, looking out toward the dark line of trees that mark the western ridgeline. And sometimes, just occasionally, I think I see them. Tall, thin figures at the forest edge, standing perfectly still, watching, always watching. And sometimes, among them, I see a human figure, a woman, her outline normal among those elongated shapes, her eyes catching what little light there is, reflecting it back like an animal's might. She raises her hand when she sees me looking. Not a wave, not a greeting. Just a simple gesture, palm open, an invitation. Come watch with us. The rain is falling harder now. Listen to it. Really listen. It's not just random patter, not just water striking surface. There's a pattern there, a rhythm, almost like words if you listen long enough. Come watch with us. They're waiting. The rain is particularly heavy tonight. I can hear it drumming against the roof of my cabin, a sound that most people find comforting. Do you? I used to. Before that night at Crowswood National Park, I found the rain soothing. Now it only reminds me of what's out there, waiting in the darkness between the trees. I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. The last 11 at stations along the eastern seaboard. But before that, I spent 5 years at Crowswood, a vast wilderness of ancient pine and hemlock in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful country, remote, the kind of place where you can hike for days without seeing another human soul. Most visitors stick to the marked trails, the designated camping areas. Few venture into the northwestern quadrant, a region so dense with old-growth forest that sunlight barely penetrates the forest floor even on the brightest summer days. We call it the Dark Quarter, though that name never appeared on any official maps or literature. Just ranger shorthand for a place most of us prefer to avoid if possible. The incident I'm about to relate occurred during my 4th year at Crowswood. Late October, just as the tourist season was winding down and the autumn rains had set in. I was working the night desk at the main ranger station when the call came through. A woman, her voice tight with controlled panic, reported that her fiancé hadn't returned from a day hike. Malcolm Reed, 34, had set out that morning to photograph birds in a remote section of the park. He was an experienced hiker and wildlife photographer who visited Crowswood regularly. He knew the rules, knew the risks, and always returned before dark. He promised he'd be back by sunset. The woman, Claire, told me, "It's nearly 9 now, and there's no sign of him. His car is still in the parking lot at the Canyon Creek trailhead." I took down the details, assuring her we'd begin searching immediately. The Canyon Creek trail wound deep into the park, skirting the edge of the Dark Quarter before looping back toward more accessible areas. If Reed had gone off trail, perhaps following a rare bird he'd spotted, he could easily have become disoriented, especially as darkness fell. My colleague, Ranger Davis, volunteered to accompany me. We gathered our gear, torches, first aid supplies, extra water, emergency shelter, and set out in the park vehicle as the rain intensified from a gentle patter to a driving downpour. Canyon Creek. Davis mused as we drove toward the trailhead. Isn't that where the Henderson party went missing back in '93? I nodded, keeping my eyes on the rain-slick road. 3 hikers. They were found eventually, disoriented, dehydrated, with no memory where they'd been for 4 days. And that runner last year, Davis added, the one who claimed he'd been followed by something in the trees. I shot him a warning glance. Let's focus on finding Reed. He's probably sprained an ankle and taken shelter somewhere along the trail. Davis fell silent, but I knew what he was thinking. Canyon Creek had a reputation among the Rangers. Nothing official, nothing documented. Just stories passed between staff during quiet night shifts. People who disappeared for days, only to be found with no recollection of where they'd been. Equipment that failed inexplicably. Strange sounds reported by even the most experienced hikers. A sense of being watched by something hidden just beyond the range of vision. The usual folkloric accretions that gather around remote wilderness areas. I'd always told myself, nothing more. We reached the Canyon Creek trailhead around 10 p.m. Reed's car was indeed still in the small gravel parking area. A blue Subaru Outback with a collection of conservation stickers on the rear bumper. We verified the license plate against the information Claire had provided, then began our search. The rain had transformed the trail into a muddy stream in places, making progress slow and treacherous. Our torch beams cut weak yellow paths through the darkness, catching raindrops and cones of light that reduced rather than improved visibility. Still, we pressed on, calling Reed's name at regular intervals, the sound swallowed by the dense forest and steady rainfall. About 2 miles in, the trail forked. The main path continued straight, following Canyon Creek deeper into the park. The secondary trail, narrower, less maintained, branched eastward toward the outer edge of what rangers call the Dark Quarter. Which way do you think he went? Davis asked, playing his torch beam down both options. I considered for a moment he was photographing birds, right? The creek would attract more species. Let's try the main trail first. We continued along the creek path for another mile, finding no sign of the missing photographer. The rain intensified, forcing us to shout to be heard over its relentless drumming. Our progress slowed further as sections of the trail became increasingly waterlogged. We should try the other fork. Davis called after we'd searched a small clearing that offered a view of the creek, the kind of spot a wildlife photographer might linger. If he was looking for the pine grosbeak that was reported last week, he might have headed that way. I nodded reluctantly. The eastern fork led toward an area I'd always found unsettling, not for any rational reason. The terrain wasn't particularly dangerous, the wildlife no more threatening than elsewhere in the park. But something about the quality of silence there, the way the ancient trees seemed to absorb sound, the perpetual twilight beneath their dense canopy. It triggered a primal unease I'd never been able to fully suppress. We backtracked to the fork and took the eastern path. Almost immediately, the character of the forest changed. The trees grew older, more massive, their branches intertwining overhead to create a cathedral-like ceiling that the rain penetrated only as a fine mist. The undergrowth thinned, giving way to a carpet of moss and ferns that muffled our footsteps. Reed, I called, my voice sounding flat and directionless in the dense air. Malcolm Reed. Only the gentle patter of raindrops on leaves answered me. We'd gone perhaps half a mile down this path when Davis stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Look at this, he said, crouching to examine something on the ground. It was a camera lens cap, half buried in the soft moss beside the trail. High-end, the kind professional photographers use. Must be Reed's, I said, bagging the item carefully. He came this way. Davis nodded, playing his torch along the trail ahead. Seems like he might have gone off path here. Look. He was right. The moss beyond the lens cap showed signs of recent disturbance, subtle, but visible to trained eyes. Someone had left the trail, heading deeper into the old-growth forest, away from the marked path. Reed! I called again, directing my voice toward the disturbance. Malcolm Reed, Park Rangers. As the sound of my voice faded, something else became audible, a faint, rhythmic clicking coming from somewhere ahead beyond the range of our torch beams. It reminded me of the sound of camera shutter, but with an odd, mechanical quality that didn't quite match any camera I was familiar with. Click, 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 pause, click. That could be him, Davis said, already moving toward the sound. Maybe his camera is malfunctioning in the dam. I followed, more cautious, trying to pinpoint the source of that strange clicking. We pushed through a stand of ferns, our torch beams sweeping the darkness ahead. The trees here were enormous, ancient giants that had stood for centuries, their trunks wider than a car, their lowest branches beginning 30 feet above our heads. The clicking grew louder as we advanced, but remained frustratingly directionless, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the gentle patter of rain filtering through the canopy far above. Even that seemed muted now, as if the forest were holding its breath. Reed! Davis called, his voice hushed despite himself. Malcolm Reed? Something moved in the darkness ahead, a shadow shifting against shadows, barely visible at the edge of our torch beams. Human shape, but somehow wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, its movements too fluid to be entirely natural. Hello? I called, fighting to keep my voice steady. Sir, we're park rangers. Are you Malcolm Reed? The figure didn't respond. Instead, it retreated further into the darkness, its motion strangely jerky, as if filmed in stop motion. Our torch beams couldn't quite seem to settle on it directly. Whenever we tried to illuminate it, it was always just beyond the reach of our light, a suggestion of form rather than a clear silhouette. I don't like this, Davis muttered, one hand moving to the bear spray on his belt. Not because he thought it was a bear, we both knew it wasn't, but because it was the only defensive tool we carried. Sir, I tried again. If you can hear me, please identify yourself. We're here to help. The clicking sound resumed, but changed now. Faster, more urgent. Click, 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 click. No longer reminiscent of a camera shutter, but something else entirely. Something communicating. And then it spoke. Not the figure in the darkness. At least, not directly. The voice seemed to come from the air around us, a whispering that might have been wind from the pine needles if it hadn't resolved into distinct words. I found something. I found something in the trees. The voice was male, the tone flat, emotionless, like someone reading from a script without comprehension. It had an odd, disjointed quality, as if each word had been recorded separately and then assembled into a sentence. Reed! I asked, my torch beam frantically searching the darkness. Malcolm Reed, is that you? I found something in the trees. The voice repeated, identical in inflection to the first time. I shouldn't have taken its picture. Shouldn't have looked at it. It doesn't like to be seen. Davis and I exchanged glances, a cold dread settling in my stomach. This was wrong. All of it. The voice, the clicking, the glimpsed figure that never quite resolved into human form. Sir, we need you to come toward our lights, Davis said, his voice admirably steady. We're here to escort you safely back to the trailhead. The clicking intensified again, becoming almost frantic. Click, 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 click. and then abruptly stopped. In the silence that followed, the figure moved again, not away from us this time, but parallel, circling around to our right, still just beyond the direct reach of our torch beams, still visible only as a suggestion of motion among the trees. It wants what it always wants, the voice said, coming now from a different direction than before. It's so hungry, so empty, it needs to be filled. What does it want? The question escaped me before I could stop myself. A violation of every protocol for dealing with potentially unstable individuals in the wilderness. The answer came not from the disembodied voice, but from directly behind us, a hot whisper against the back of my neck, though I'd neither heard nor felt anyone approach. Eyes. It wants your eyes to see with. I spun around, torch raised like a weapon, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing, just darkness and ancient trees and the gentle patter of rain. We're leaving, Davis said, his voice tight with controlled fear. Now, whoever you are, sir, we strongly advise you follow us back to the trail. We began to retreat the way we'd come, moving carefully but quickly, back to maintain 360-degree visibility. The clicking sound followed us, sometimes from the left, sometimes the right, sometimes seeming to come from directly overhead among the branches. I caught glimpses of movement on all sides now, not just one figure, but many, tall, thin shapes gliding between trees with uncanny smoothness, always just at the periphery of vision, never directly illuminated despite our frantic efforts with the torches. What are they? Davis whispered, his earlier professional calm crumbling. What the hell are they? I had no answer. All I knew was that we needed to reach the trail, to get back to the ranger station, to bring reinforcements before attempting to find Reed again. If indeed he was still out here, still alive, we were perhaps halfway back to the trail when my torch flickered, dimmed, and went out. Davis's followed a moment later, plunging us into near total darkness. Only the faintest suggestion of moonlight filtered through the dense canopy above, barely enough to distinguish tree trunks from the spaces. The clicking surrounded us now, coming from dozens of sources simultaneously, creating a chittering chorus that made my skin crawl, and with it, that voice or voices. For now it seemed to be many speaking in unison, all with that same flat, recorded quality. I found something in the trees. I found something. It found me. Run, Davis said simply. And we did. We crashed through the forest, guided more by instinct than vision, stumbling over roots, branches whipping at our faces. The clicking pursued us, always just behind, always drawing closer no matter how fast we fled. And with it came a sound like dry branches snapping, like bones breaking, like something moving in ways living flesh was never meant to move. I don't know how we found the trail again. Blind luck, perhaps, or some ranger's instinct that operated below the level of conscious thought. But suddenly, there was beneath our feet, the packed earth of the marked path, a slightly lighter ribbon in the darkness. We followed it, not slowing, the sound of pursuit still close behind. The rain intensified as we neared the main canyon creek trail, as if we were leaving some protective bubble where weather itself was held at bay. By the time we reached the fork, we were running through a downpour, soaked to the skin despite our waterproofs. Only when we reached the parking area, when the ranger vehicle came into view, did we finally slow, gasping for breath, turning to face whatever might have followed us from the darkness. Nothing visible pursued us into that small clearing. The rain fell in sheets, illuminated by the vehicle's headlights that Davis fumbled to activate with shaking hands. Beyond their reach, the trail vanished back into primal darkness, revealing nothing of what might lurk just beyond the light's edge. But the clicking continued, now coming from the surrounding forest. Dozens of sources, hundreds, a communication we couldn't understand, a language never meant for human comprehension. We drove back to the ranger station in silence, both reluctant to voice what we experienced. At the station, we reported finding evidence that Reed had gone off-trail, the lens cap, the disturbed moss. We recommended assembling a larger search team for First Light, when visibility would be better. We made no mention of the clicking, the voices, the figures glimpsed but never clearly seen. Who would believe us? What could we possibly write in an official report? The search resumed at dawn with 4 teams of 3 rangers each. I led one team back to where we'd found the lens cap, back to where we'd heard that strange clicking in the darkness. In daylight, with a dozen other rangers nearby, I felt more confident, less susceptible to the tricks night and rain and isolation can play on the human mind. We found nothing. No further signs of Reed. No evidence he'd ever been there beyond that single lens cap. We searched for 2 more days before weather conditions forced us to scale back operations. A week later, Malcolm Reed walked out of the forest. Not at Canyon Creek, but at a trailhead 15 miles away on the opposite side of the park. He was dehydrated, disoriented, missing his camera equipment and one shoe. When questioned about where he'd been, what happened to him, he could only shake his head, a look of profound confusion on his gaunt face. "I found something in the trees," he said repeatedly in a flat, affectless voice that made the hair on my arm stand on end. I shouldn't have taken its picture. It doesn't like to be seen. The medical examination revealed no physical injuries beyond the expected scratches and bruises of someone who'd spent a week in rough terrain. But the neurological test showed abnormalities, patterns of brain activity that the doctors had never encountered before. Regions that should have been inactive were lighting up. Regions that should have been communicating weren't. After 3 days in hospital, Reed checked himself out against medical advice and disappeared. His fiancée reported that he wasn't answering his phone, had emptied their joint bank account, and had left no indication of where he was going. A missing persons report was filed, but no trace of Malcolm Reed has ever been found. I transferred to an eastern park the following month. I told myself it was for career advancement, for a change of scenery. I lied to myself, because sometimes in the deep of night when rain falls heavily against my windows, I hear it again, that rhythmic clicking coming from the woods behind my new home. And sometimes when I force myself to look through rain-streaked glass into the darkness beyond, I see them, tall, thin figures standing at the forest's edge, watching, waiting. And I know that whatever found Malcolm Reed in those ancient woods is spreading, moving eastward, forest by forest, park by park, learning, growing, hungry. Listen to the rain. Listen carefully. Is that just water falling from the sky? Or is it something else? Something clicking. Something communicating. Something coming for your eyes.